So the main difference between infrastructure and cloud engineering is the way in which software is delivered. So I started my journey in technology as an infrastructure engineer, and then I later transitioned into cloud engineering or site reliability engineering. I'm sort of using the two interchangeably here. And when making this change, I realized that the biggest thing is on how software is delivered or distributed. And I'm sort of talking very specifically about the software delivery lifecycle and in terms of the waterfall and agile approaches and sort of how all of that fits in together. So, in the infrastructure world, software is typically built all up front and then it's distributed or delivered at predetermined or scheduled times. So, for example, a development team might spend a few months building out features and then plan a release for that change. And as an infrastructure engineer, your job would be to coordinate with those development teams to figure out what they need and to schedule the downtime for the infrastructure. And basically, you would work hand in hand with them, but the two sort of happen out of sync. So you will have developers working and in one part, and then infrastructure engineers doing their typical BAU work in another part. And what would happen is developers would raise a support ticket, and then they would coordinate that time to schedule their release. So there's a very clear line of separation between the two teams, so you could say. So developers and infra engineers work very very separately. That still happens today, but in my experience, the whole DevOps movement happened, and that changed a lot about how infra teams work with developers. And I think that perhaps, in the typically if you're working in a cloud environment, it might be more obvious that this change has happened, which may not be so clear in the more of the on-premise world. But that's not to say that it hasn't changed there either. So what I mean is in the cloud engineering world, you typically have, I mean, depending on where you are, SRE, cloud engineering, or DevOps could all mean the same thing. And the biggest difference here is that software is delivered incrementally and then pushed out to the environment whenever it's ready. So in essence, right, you have cloud engineers and developers working very hand in hand to deliver software in an incremental way. So every time developers make a change, it's not a whole thing where you need to schedule time and take the system down. They can do it in a very staggered approach. So they can make a small change and then have that released to the environment and customers like pretty quickly. And I guess two things, right? Like the first thing is we get like customers will get to have the feature in their hands like much sooner. But the other thing is that for engineers, it's a breaking down of silos essentially. So you have groups of people who are all working together to get the software out and to customers. And I think that's the biggest thing. So that's all I really had to say. Something to think about. Thank you for watching.